What is up, Drum Alert Nation? This here's our host. This is your host. This is your host. Killer Kingstar. Tô escondido. Ninguém me pode ver. Isto diz-me que já joguei isto durante 55 horas. Quantas mais horas é que eu consigo jogar isto? Estou-te a ver, caralho. Olá, estás bom? Como é que andamos? Meti aqui uns hip-hops a dar por trás, mas podemos meter qualquer... Até se tiver qualquer vídeo. Até se meter um vídeo no background. No foreground. Como é que estás? Em dois pensei em Guimarães, por alguma razão. Pensei só. Veio-me à cabeça. Bem. No Man's Sky. I mean, you can't be a man in this game, right? A música deve estar muito alta, não está? Dá-me a impressão que pus a música muito alta. Yeah. Tica 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 desu ka? Tica 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 desu ka? Sugoi desu ne. Sugoi desu ne. Olha, mas como é que tens estado, meu? E porquê é que eu estou no meio do espaço? Ah, ok. Porquê é que eu tenho que meter isto aqui? Porquê é que ele está a desenhar a minha capa ainda? Yay! Eu gosto muito deste jogo, ok? Mas, primeiro, eu gosto muito de espaço. E segundo, gosto de chilar. São duas coisas que eu gosto muito. Daí eu dizer-te, se quiseres meter aí um videozinho, se queres pedir para meter aí um videozinho no Picture in Picture, mete aí. Ontem estive a ver Donkey. Ontem estiveste da praia? Estás de férias? Yo, férias hype. Mais uma semana e trabalhos? No es bueno, no quiero trabajo. E eu ainda ando por aqui, a trabalhar por casa, não é? Que eu agradeço imenso, gosto muito de trabalhar em casa. Ih, tanto salva-te data. Ah, peraí. Pensar bem, eu acho que tenho que fazer o que... Ok, vou chamar... estes gajos. Tu queres vir aqui visitar antes de voltares ao trabalho? Eu ainda não percebi se vou estar aqui este fim de semana ou não. Mas em princípio estou. E concordo, meu. Olha, sempre que vens visitar, nós nunca fomos ao jardim, pois não? Bora ao jardim, meu. É a rodovia. É a rodovia aqui perto. É um semi-jardim. Tipo, tem ciclovia, whatever, via, relva. Um skatepark. apesar de eu não ter skate cá em Braga. Eu quero gastar todos os meus coisinhos. Já sabes onde é. E aquilo atravessa quase a cidade toda, pelo que eu percebi. Porque eu uma vez eu e as minhas colegas andamos para aí 2 horas a andar aquilo, estás a ver? Tipo, xiça. Depois passávamos pela rua. Cenas assim. Fiz um curso de nadador Salvador. Onde? No quê? Naqueles sítios da rodovia? Tipo da. Aquilo tem um sítio de karaté. Eu qualquer dia me inscrevo-me lá no karaté. O que é que achas? Eu preciso disto. Automatically stores the output. Yeah, nem há muita dúvida. O resto já construí tudo. Vou comprar estes 3. Eu não me estou a ver a usar estes botões, não sei para que é que haveria de usar isto. É para fazer fábricas. Isto é o factório. Foi ao lado disso, pois, eu muitas vezes... olha, esse é o spot onde eu gosto de... Esse sítio onde tu dizes... é o spot onde eu gosto... Tem assim uma área assim muito grande de relva, então é aí onde eu gosto de soltar a cadela e ela dá ali voltas e não sei o quê. Está boa, está a crescer bem. Está ali sentadinha, está deitadinha ali no sofá, a lamber a pata. O que é que foi? Pronto, estou a falar dela, está a olhar para mim. Tipo, o que é que foi? 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 Fui ao jardim com ela e com uma colega de carro. Coitada, estava a chatear a minha colega tanto, porque o meu carro só tem 2 lugares, não é? Easy access. Eu não tenho feito bases subaquáticas, mas eu estou mortinho por fazer. Quando fizer já tenho aqui estas coisas. Yeah. Estou a ouvir royalty free hip hop music. O que é que achas? Eu não sei porque é que eu quero 2 landing pads. Mas isto vai dar ao teleporter. Custa 0? Good for chilling? Também acho que sim, meu. Bem chilling. Mas again, se quiseres meter um videozinho, mete. Estou a pensar. Às vezes gosto de meter cenas para aprender, mas ao mesmo tempo, à noite, não tenho ideias para coisas para aprender. Durante o dia tenho sempre ideias para meter um vídeo por trás de coisas para aprender. Communication station. I don't see the usefulness in that. Cuboid something. The roof is on fire. Pode ser, meu. Pensei que tinha ficado com... Não sei o que é isto, mas vou gastar tudo. Flooring. O que é isto? Cuboid inner door. Pode ser. E pronto, gastei todo o meu... Gastei todos os meus Savage Data que andei a procurar na rua. Ok, vamos ver aqui o Synthesis Laboratory. Eu sei que tem sempre aqui coisas. Organic whatever. Isto já começa a ser high tier items. Eu não sei se tens noção de que tipo de jogo é que isto é, mas eu adoro este jogo. Eu gosto de coisas que misturam muita coisa. Se calhar é isso. Mas anyway, isto é tipo parte Survivor, parte Exploration, parte MMO, parte... não. Tem um bocadinho de tudo. Olha, posso fazer um Magno Gold. Isto aqui dá para eu... sabes qual deve ser o interesse disto? Isto é tipo, eu peguei nesta merda, faço craft disto e depois vendo por cagalhões de gorilhões de dinheiros. Onde é que está o circuit board? Não sei ver. Está aqui. É com Heat Capacitor. Uau! Estes itens são do mesmo tier. No entanto, usas um para fazer o outro. Frost Crystal e Solanium. Onde é que está o Frost Crystal? Tem aqui. Iridesite. Acho que isto aqui é super top tier. Acho que é super caro. Yeah. Acho que nota-se aqui pela coisa. Esta barrinha aqui amarela. Cryopump. Hot ice. Nitrogen salt. Enriched carbon. Isto parece mesmo cenas de endgame. Superconductor. Olha, vou fazer tudo, caguei. Let's go. Gastei tudo. Gastei tudo por ela. Gastei. E eu aqui no Exocraft acho que já não tenho grandes coisas para comprar, ou tenho? Nautilus Cannon. Don't really care. Maybe some Minotaur stuff. Minotaur. AI Pilot. Autonomous Control Unit. Installation allows the Minotaur to traverse planets itself. What? Agora estou a começar a perceber qual é o interesse do Minotaur. Isto é um mech. Este Minotaur é um mech que pode-se controlar sozinho. E minar por mim e cenas. Hey, that's fucking cool. An automatic... Olha... Oh, não tenho 480... Pera. So, you're gonna space? Yes, 100%. Mas estou aqui numa base. Porque isto tem um... Como é que eu ia dizer? Isto tem um gameplay loop. Não sei se gosto de usar muito esta expressão. Mas... Opa, andas a passear por planetas e a angariar coisas e fazer quests, blá blá blá. Mas agora estou a dar redeem de montes de coisas que apanhei, sabes? Que é para... Estou a arranjar blueprints para construir base stuff. Estava agora a arranjar upgrades para veículos. E um dos veículos é o mech. Spaceship? Não. O mech é para... não, isso não posso, infelizmente. Que eu saiba. Sei lá. Seja como for. Tu podes andar com um mechzito nos planetas. Eu por acaso nunca o fiz, caguei. Mas tenho que fazer. Especialmente agora que vi aquela cena do AI. Agora que vi que há um upgrade para ele poder andar sozinho. Porque imagina, vou explorar com o gajo e depois é tipo, vou minar aqui umas coisas. E quando eu saio ele ajuda-me. Vai andar a minar também coisas lá à volta e a combater e tal. Ei! Quero comprar esta coisa do AI. E é isto. No entanto, Eu não tenho mais nada, só tenho Minotaur Laser. Preciso de Minotaur Laser. O que é que isto faz? Deve ser para apanhar, para conseguir fazer... Pois... Honestamente, antes do AI vale mais a pena outras coisas. Yeah, estas coisas valem todas mais a pena primeiro. Epá, deixa-me. Este Precision é mais útil. Mas também se calhar para já eu não faço. Quando digo, olha, estás a ver isto, o que eu disse com ser parte MMO? Olha aqui, isto é um random guy. Oh, invite to grupo. Olha, este está na Steam. E tem o símbolo da Steam porque este jogo é multi... é cross. Wait, se é cross? Quer dizer que o pessoal da... Se é cross, quer dizer que o pessoal da Switch também vai poder jogar? Quando sair na Switch? Isso seria insane. Olha, este é um multitool não vale uma pizza em relação à minha. Tipo, come on. Get it together, game developers. Não, quero patterns in time ou whatever. Eu acho que para já quero dar o base desta galáxia. Fuck, digo sempre galáxia, mas não é galáxia, é um sistema. Quero sair desse sistema solar. Space? Space! People, papo. Ora bem, vamos ver... agora sim, vamos ver a galáxia. Ora bem, o meu próximo objetivo... Alright! E tenho alguma coisa aqui para fazer? Não, não tenho nada. Tenho uma base? Tenho. Let's go! Engage! Warp time! Falar nisso, já estive a meter um... Eu nunca uso a minha televisão. Mas hoje estive a tentar tratar de meter episódios numa pen de coisas. Obviamente vai ser Star Trek, não é? Vocês já deviam saber. Que é para rever, mas agora nesta TV da sala. E aí? Yeah. É das cenas mais cozy, meu. Yeah, Next Generation, sim. Yes, yes, yes. Vai ser bué da fixe. Eu acho que este comando está a dar de si. Felizmente eu arranjei o meu último comando. Ou o meu outro comando. Mas este é mais fixe para jogar em casa porque é maior. Fuck. Oh, já não tenho espaço? Pera. Yeah, agora está a começar a vir para o Technology. Mas também pode ser para o Cargo? Wait a minute. Isto afinal é hype? Ok, o Technology é bom, mas o Cargo é melhor. Afinal ainda posso continuar a aumentar o espaço no meu exosuit. Aí pronto, mais 1000 horas a jogar isto, caguei. Let's fucking go! Upgrade modules. Nope, não tenho nada para vender. Um slot para a multitool. Eu vou ser honesto, eu gostava de comprar um slot para a multitool. Acho que vou comprar. Yeah. Isto já tem muitos, mas já arranjava mais um. Xiça. Eu não tenho este tipo de dinheiro. Eu tenho que começar a fazer mais dinheiro constantemente. Constantemente. Acho que não é essa a palavra que eu quero. Seja como for, eu preciso de espaços para... Pois, eu preciso comprar mais espaços. Ok, Navigation Data é fixe. Quer dizer que consigo falar com o Cartographer para ele me indicar sítios interessantes para explorar nos planetas aqui à volta. Eu não sei que percepção é que tinhas de No Man's Sky, mas eu estou a adorar este jogo. Onde é que está o Hydreigon, oh caralho? E tu, Hydreigon é um Pokémon, eu sei, enganei-me, desculpa. Sulfurine, Ammonia... Havia uma coisa aqui que se vende por muito dinheiro. Que merda, não é nada disto. O que é que este gajo quer? Ah, e depois este jogo tem várias linguagens. E então este gajo pequenino é um gecko. Olha, vou aprender uma palavra qualquer. Pois tem, mas mesmo bem, tem... Eu digo mesmo, como developer acho isso incrível. Tipo, eles terem a oportunidade de ficar 6 anos a melhorar o jogo e o jogo ficar mesmo fixe. Uau, é mesmo impressionante. Mas pronto. Nem toda a gente tem este luxo, percebes? Tipo, nem todas as equipas, não é, de desenvolvimento têm o luxo de ficar tanto tempo a trabalhar num jogo. Technology. E agora, tipo, é insane. Agora vai para a Switch, mano. E do que eu vi foi tipo, uau, tendo em conta que eu já sei que o jogo é, não é? Que quando vi o trailer já tinha começado a jogar o jogo. Acho que está bastante bem adaptado, tipo, aparentemente. Fogo. Há certas coisas que eu penso, foda-se, como é que a Switch vai aguentar isto? Mas olha, a maneira como este é um jogo de exploração e não sei o quê, deve ser mesmo fixe jogar na Switch. Quer dizer, não sei, depende. Deve ser mesmo fixe poderes continuar o jogo na Switch. Gente, tenho que sair de casa, mas vou estar num casamento ou caralho e não quero falar com ninguém porque sou antissocial. Ok, não sei. Não tenho a ver a situação, mas pronto. Olá, Valkyries. Muito boas noites. Bem disposto? Life Support Gel. Ok, vamos trocar os... Ah, não, isto é a quest, ok. Voltei a ser... Might Rula. Como é que é, pessoal? Might Rula chegou. As a life form begins to speak, I hear a faint hum. The soft voice of Null weaving the Gex's words into something I can process. Information like that does not come for free, friend. Make me a deal, perform work for my kin. Then we shall have something to speak about. Okay. Mission board located? What? Wait, what? What? What is he talking about? Hey, what the fuck is the guy talking about? Complete contracts for the GEC. É por isso que ele apontou-me logo para a missão? Pois, eu já tenho as missions in progress. Então, ele pôs-me logo no Giant Raid. Ok, está bem. Esta é a parte mais confusa deste jogo, vou ser honesto. É toda a gestão de quests. Então, vamos então. E vocês? Como é que é? Frequency Apollo? What does he want? I'm sorry for contacting you so late or early. I don't know the time of day on your world. What? Se eu ando só está de mundo em mundo, como é que ele pode dizer isto? Anyway. Apollo breaks off mid-sentence, the heart turning crimson. Are you alright? It found me, just like it found you. I can feel my legs. It's strange. I'm still in here, don't you understand? It won't let me leave. It's seen me. Ask what they see. It showed me things. The atlas showed me my soul. The numbers in there, Eles agora meteram uma história para não ser só explorar. Eu concordo. É fixe misturar uma coisa com a outra, que é para quando estás farto. What everyone in the universe does, I know. But I can't help but want to be happy. Money, doing what you're told, day after day. That's the answer, isn't it? That's what we do, right? Fellow chatters. Pessoas do chati. Vocês gostam de trabalhar e ganhar dinheiro? Para ir ao café? I don't know. Apollo stares at me as if seeing my face for the first time. Eventually they speak, their words passionate, higher. What is he talking about? What the... At this point, Apollo says nothing else, but something. I don't know what. Well, está pessoal aos gritos lá fora. Something fills me with hope, both for my friend and for my life, for all life. What? What was this? What the fuck do you want, Apollo? Bitch. I'm supposed to cull creatures. Eu diria que qualquer planeta serve, não é? Oi, está uma nave atrás de mim? Quer-me foder a boca? Piu, 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 piu. Espera, isto são naves? Pensei que eram meteoritos. Posso contratar um palhaço qualquer. Eu estou a precisar de contratar pessoas. Mas também posso ser pirata. Posso matar o gajo. Que cena. You are recruiting, yes? Isso é mesmo fixe, não é? Especialmente tu, Valkyrios. Tu que gostas de role-playing. Só o simples facto do jogo te dar a oportunidade de hey, podes atacar o gajo ou podes tentar contratá-lo ou whatever. Também podes ser smuggler ou podes ser um gajo super legit. Só o facto deles darem essa oportunidade de escolheres uma cena torna a coisa muito mais do teu gosto, não é? Porque tu és um roleplayer. Vou inspectar. Se estes gajos forem da porrada... eu não quero um trade specialist. Né. Espera, o que é isto? Mas eu posso roubar isto? Eu não estou a perceber. Imaginar que a coisa não vai correr nada bem para mim, não é? Está ali uma coisa a brilhar. Planeta estranho. Daqueles todos cristalinos, ou caralho. Oh não, não me digas, não vai ter lá as criaturas. Calma lá que estão ali criaturas. Pilsate. Las criaturas. Oh, I gotta kill it. I don't want to. I hate killing creatures. Wait, I don't think I can kill this one. What? Return to the mission, Asian. Ja? Dangerous explosions? Okay, I'm confused. Yet again. Mas não é isto que eu estava a fazer. Era Giant Raid. Só tem tipo 1 de 15, exatamente. Super tiro 9000. Espero que ele não chame os amiguinhos para me foder a boca. Por que os bichinhos não têm uma barra de health? Gold? Although, eu vim aqui para lá as criaturas. Acho que vou ver mais uma cena das psicologias. Ferrite Dust. Pois eu tenho um problema com o Ferrite Dust. Não, não tenho. Tenho um problema com a Pure Ferrite. Tenho tanto espaço nisto. Eu devia ter andado a meter coisas aqui. Technology. Technology. E agora, com a magia do cargo, posso fazer isto. Well, I guess it was a lie. That was a lie. Isso foi do cargo para o cargo. Então um desperdício. Engage. I want this one. Ah, já tinha este a meio.
For lots of people who experience abuse and trauma, from religious to occupational to domestic, a common symptom they wrestle with is rumination, perpetually dwelling on their experience. This symptom can last for weeks, months, sometimes years. I want to explore this psychological trap and look at various ways of extracting ourselves from it. In broad terms, rumination is defined as the process of thinking deeply about something or the product of that thought. And in ordinary circumstances, there's no harm in this kind of immersive reflection. We use it to acclimatize to new information and situations. For example, in bereavement, where thinking intensely and repeatedly about what we've lost allows us to adjust to the new reality. We use rumination to make complicated plans and solve problems. It can help us overcome the errors we often fall into when we rely on more simplistic, emotionally driven reflex thinking. The biases, the prejudices, the habitual mental
He's
shortcuts we
hostile.
take that cloud and distort complex realities. In its positive form, rumination can lead to insight and progress. It's the morbid form that leads to problems, when we find ourselves circling endlessly and unproductively around negative thoughts, images, mistakes, encounters. Like a deeply scratched vinyl record, we skip back to the same position, looping around the same groove, never moving forward. Frida constantly replays memories of an abusive relationship. She recalls various scenes from the relationship and imagines herself responding differently, shouting back angrily and standing her ground.
Oh, I've watched this one.
Whole afternoons, evenings, nights can be swallowed up, internally rehearsing a single incident that lasts barely a minute and that Frida's revisited countless times before. Roger frequently experiences nightmarish thoughts of a magical realm of eternal torture that he was told existed after death. As a child, he was fed vivid fantasies about the terrible punishments awaiting people there, like being starved and taunted with food they couldn't reach, or being made to jump off high cliffs, then having their smashed bodies restored just so they could jump again, forever. Roger was told that he was born with a sick nature and deserved this torture, and that his only hope of escaping it was to beg forgiveness for his imperfect thoughts and imperfect actions. Only after his death would he learn if he'd done enough groveling. Since childhood, Roger's struggled to meet the paralyzing expectations imposed on him, brooding incessantly on his shortcomings, obsessing over possible negative consequences to his actions, fearing the forbidden thoughts that could flash uninvited into consciousness at any moment. Joni lives far away from her abusive father. That distance and her hectic work life have given her a plausible excuse to minimize contact. She only sees him at large family events where she can avoid being alone with him. The one form of contact she still struggles with are the letters they continue to send each other. Seeing one of his arrive, her body will flood with adrenaline. She'll open it with shaking hands. Reading it, the world will disappear. Nothing else will exist but his words, which will seesaw between pathos and unbridled persecution. One moment piling on frailty and vulnerability with a trowel, the next firing savage accusations at Joni, scapegoating her for his problems. The letter will preoccupy her for days. These ruminations leave Joni, Frida and Roger feeling churned up, disconnected from their lives and stuck firmly in the past. The irony is that for all three of them, rumination began as a coping strategy. For many people, rumination seems to offer some kind of comfort at first. For Roger, who had experienced huge spikes of panic and anxiety in response to some perceived shortcoming, rumination would initially have a dampening effect
Este é
on his
planeta
emotions.
tipo bug.
As punishing as it felt, dwelling on thoughts of worthlessness gave him a degree of psychological shelter from
Junk
the shock
Data
feelings.
planet.
But eventually, raw from his compulsive mental self-flagellation, he would trade anxiety for depression. For Frida, who'd felt like a powerless doormat in her past relationship, reimagining herself as the angry victor made her feel powerful for a while. The anger was intoxicating and addictive, and she would rehearse her fantasies over and over to sustain the high. As she became aware of the hours slipping by, she'd start promising herself the next repetition would be the last, and she would repeatedly break that promise. Unable to stop herself, she would gradually succumb to feelings of intense powerlessness. For Joni, who would feel immobilized by her father's letters, rumination would initially offer her an illusion of hope that maybe this time she'd think of a game-changing response that would set them on a different track. But for every idea that came to mind, she'd see how he could twist it against her. She knew how a single innocent word could be loaded with false poison. Slowly, exhausted from futile overthinking, she would sink into despair. Many abused and traumatized individuals intuitively believe rumination is somehow helping them cope, but the evidence points in the opposite direction. Rumination is often the gateway to much bigger problems.
Wait, what problems?
A substantial body of research suggests that far from doing any good, rumination plays a significant role in both the onset and the maintenance of various mood-related problems involving anxiety, stress, compulsions, and depression. Studies have highlighted some of the specific features of rumination that pull us down these pathological paths. Investigating the role of rumination in post-traumatic stress disorder, Tanya Michael and colleagues note that patients often focus on open-ended, unresolvable why and what if types of questions, instead of the actual traumatic experience. Edward Watkins and colleagues have reported similar findings in the areas of anxiety, depression, and impulsive behaviors. They found a significant determining factor in the experience of these problems was whether the individual engaged in concrete or abstract rumination. Concrete rumination involves gathering clear, discernible details, observable facts, quantifiable evidence. We confine ourselves to what actually happened. With abstract rumination, we drift away from facts and start contemplating questions that have no definitive answers. We become preoccupied with possibilities, possible meanings, possible motives, possible consequences. The possibilities are endless and debilitating. Concrete rumination addresses the specific context of a situation. If we fail a task, we try to identify the specific factors that led to that particular failure. By doing that, we get the chance to learn from it and move on. Abstract rumination works in the opposite direction, removing context and distorting information into broad generalizations. If we fail a task, we generalize it into a personality trait. We become a failure. We can't do anything right. We might also apply generalizations to other people. If friends are unable to fit in with our plans, perhaps because they're dealing with their own personal demands or struggles, we dismiss that context and label them selfish and uncaring. Abstract rumination globalizes our negative experiences. We convince ourselves that something that happened once will always be the case, and has always been the case. These distortions prevent us from learning and leave us with a sense of hopelessness. Unlike the more systematic focus seen in concrete rumination, with abstract rumination is often a haphazard butterfly focus. Individuals hop around from thought to thought, from memory to memory, in a disorganized way, never stopping long enough to see anything through to the point of resolution. Because of this vague processing, past experiences of significantly different natures get blurred together into false patterns. Eventually, individuals become overloaded with unresolved thoughts and feelings. Abstract rumination magnifies and prolongs negative states. Like a black hole, it consumes vast amounts of energy and offers no light, just an expanding sense of darkness. To combat abstract rumination, we need to put our thoughts in their proper place. Even when we're not ruminating, we often give our thoughts quite staggering power and control over us. As children, we're often taught to view our thoughts as reflections of who we are. We learn to equate our thoughts with our identity.
I don't know.
Even
Nobody
the
ever
most
talked to
random
me
emotions that pop
as a
into
child.
our heads feel like a
So I don't know what he's
comment on
talking
our
about.
deepest self. If uncharitable thoughts cross our minds, it means we're wicked, even if we never act on them. Some religious groups push this misconception further with the concept of thought crime. Merely thinking about doing something becomes the same as doing it. Oddly, this only seems to apply to bad thoughts. There's no positive equivalent for heroism for good thoughts. Fantasizing about giving vast amounts of money to charity isn't considered the same as doing it. Equating thoughts with actions gives them a completely fraudulent power status. The concept of magical wishes elevates that status further. Now, our thoughts make
I hate that it
things
says
happen.
status and not status.
Magical wishes are a source of false hope and often great anguish. Sometimes, in a moment of anger, we might wish for something bad. When our anger passes, instead of viewing our wish as a momentary expression of mental frustration, we worry it's had some physical effect on the universe. In these and other ways, we let our thoughts push us all out of shape. Breaking the powerful emotional hold our thoughts have over us means changing our relationship to thinking. The concept of distancing refers to the exercise of standing back from our thoughts and viewing them from a detached perspective. John Powers and Kevin LeBar noted various kinds of distancing. They used the example of feeling hurt by a criticism from a co-worker. We could use objective distancing, imagining how the criticism might be viewed by a neutral third party. Temporal distancing involves imagining the criticism happened years ago. With hypothetical distancing, we'd imagine the incident was a theoretical situation instead of a real one. Distancing removes us from the emotional impulses of the moment that can distort and block our processing, and allows us to consider different responses. As we exercise more detachment from our thoughts, we can exercise more choice over which thoughts we engage with. When thoughts pop into our heads, we often automatically give them our immediate attention. If people turned up at our house uninvited, we wouldn't automatically let them in. We'd ask ourselves, is it a convenient time for us? What are these people here for? Is it pleasure, business, some emergency? We'd decide whether or not we wanted to invite them in. Thoughts are like guests in the houses of our minds. We can choose which ones we open our doors to and which ones we decline to entertain. Just like human visitors who refuse to take no for an answer, we might find that some negative thoughts persist in trying to push their way in and get our attention. In tackling them, it's important to recognize the difference between resisting them and dismissing them. There might be a natural temptation to try and expel persistent thoughts from our minds by force, to try and lock them out with sheer willpower. When we do this, we create an internal conflict that sets us up for failure and frustration. If someone says, don't think of a chair, what are you
You'll
most
think of
likely
the chair.
to think of? When we try not to think of something, we're asking some part of our brain to keep track of the thing we don't want to keep track of. It's like handcuffing ourselves to something, then trying to run away from it. The more defenses we put up, the more frustrated we get when the thought continues to break through them, the more power we give the thought over us. We drift into a fearful position, dreading its return. In contrast, when we dismiss a thought, instead of trying to block it out by force, we accept that the thought exists and simply choose not to give it any energy. Some people find it useful at the start to speak directly to the thought, to say something like, "I acknowledge your existence, but I have no use for you."
Stupid thought. Stupid
I
thought.
know you'd like some of my time.
You made
not
me look
today.
bad. Booga, booga, booga.
Because we're not working against ourselves, we preserve internal harmony. Because the persistent thought no longer arouses anxiety or frustration, it loses power, and we maintain an emotionally neutral position. Eventually, starved of attention, the uninvited thought will fade away, and we won't even notice. Recognizing that we can choose which thoughts we give our attention to means we always have the option to simply disengage from any persistent negative thought at any time and stop rumination in its tracks. Building on that, I want to look at some ways we can help to permanently uproot negative thoughts and restore the balance that rumination disrupted. In some cases of rumination, our thoughts don't correspond to any real problem. We're wrestling with an illusion. We can end this kind of rumination permanently by debunking the hollow idea or belief that's kept us stuck. This involves cultivating our inner lawyer and shifting from abstract to concrete processing. Roger was tormented by the possibility of a magical realm of eternal torment. His indoctrinators had injected him with an unanswerable question, a torturous what if. When zealots ply us with horrifying magical what ifs, we need to be very clear about what they're doing. They're trying to plant an anxiety inside us that we can't resolve. When we start down the path of what ifs, there's no end to the available horror. Whatever nightmare possibility we imagine, we can always imagine something worse. We can always add more horror. The fear we feel contemplating those what ifs isn't a response to any real danger. It's a response to our own imagination. Roger's recovery from rumination began when he reined in his imagination and shifted his focus to
Vou ser
discernible
honesto, isto do Cull
details and
Creatures,
identifiable facts. When he changed the
no
what
caso
if
deste
until
planeta,
what
todo
is,
bug,
the fact was
não me importa
that
nada de fazer.
indoctrinators had never
São só
offered any
paus,
persuasive
não
evidence
são bichinhos.
for a single one of their claims. They'd simply
Sim, estou a ser
subjected him to
racista
magical
para bugs.
fear-mongering.
Mas também
Let his
pensem qual é
mind
que é o meu
run
trabalho,
wild.
não é?
And in his terror, he'd surrendered
Vocês sabem em que é que eu trabalho?
rationality.
Pois.
Now, with rationality restored, Roger's inner lawyer dismissed their case on the grounds of
Bugs é
total
para
lack
esmagar.
of evidence. While Roger's rumination was ultimately based on an illusion, for many others, the focus of their rumination is very tangible, like Joni's father. Sometimes we get stuck ruminating on a problem because we keep using the same fixed approach. We need to reframe the picture, view it from another angle. As noted before, with abstract ruminations, we're often viewing situations through a distorting lens of broad generalizations, when we need to be looking at specific contexts. In Joni's case, she assumed everyone was fundamentally amenable to reason, and as long as she continued to view her father from that fixed angle, she continued to exhaust herself trying to reason with him. Her rumination ended when she allowed herself to view him from a different angle, as someone who wasn't open to reason. From there, everything fell into place. Abusers come in a variety of forms. Some act like 5-year-olds, often because in some important developmental terms, that's what they are, children. Some abusers are like histrionic actors, generating endless melodramas and casting themselves in the starring role, often as some noble, unappreciated victim. Joni realized this was what her father was doing. He had no interest in listening to reason. He was focused purely on hunting for grievances to create his dramas. When Joni recognized this, she stopped taking his letters seriously. Whenever they arrived, she would read them aloud in the style they were written, like a Shakespearean tragedy. Instead of a source of stress, they became a source of entertainment. She continued to write back occasionally, but kept her replies brief and wasted no unnecessary thought on them. When we get stuck in one perspective, seeing things from another angle can be a transformative experience. Another way to step out of rumination is to give our thoughts and feelings some external expression. Many writers say they can never discuss a project with anyone until it's completed. Talking about it before it's done takes away the drive to see the project through. They no longer feel the need to tell the story, because by sharing it with someone, it feels like it's already been told. In the same way, the drive to ruminate often subsides when we find some way to get our thoughts out of our heads where they just go in circles and give them some external expression. There are many ways to do this. Keeping journals, using some creative medium like painting or music. Some people use what's called the empty chair technique. They imagine the person they're ruminating about sitting in front of them in an empty chair and say whatever they need to say. For some targets of abuse, writing letters to their abusers really purges their minds of a lot of pent-up material. For people who do choose to write letters, a word of caution: don't ever send them. It's not about engaging with the abuser, it's just about releasing our thoughts. Some people burn or shred their letters. Some post them back to themselves. Whatever works for you. It's worth saying something here about expressing anger. Anger is an important and valuable emotion. It can give us strength and motivation to combat real abuse. And sometimes we can lose ourselves in it. Frida's angry reinventions of past scenes with her abuser made her feel only strong, one time, but kept her from moving forward. Her anger made it easy for her to see all her problems as someone else's fault. It also prevented her from recognizing and processing the softer feelings that her anger was covering. Feelings of hurt and vulnerability. It was when Frida was finally able to express her full range of feelings that she began to free herself from the past. Activity can be a great preventative measure against rumination. Not necessarily in the way we might intuitively think. Some people use activity as a distraction technique, but this doesn't always help. Because we're using activity as a kind of resistance, an attempt to push thoughts away, it can end up arousing more anxiety. Activity helps to restore balance to our lives. Rumination can lead to prolonged periods of inactivity. Preoccupied in our thoughts, we put off social engagements, we fail to plan recharging breaks, we neglect ourselves. We stop doing the things that might help to lift us out of our mood. As days of inactivity begin to mount up, our rumination becomes self-feeding. All we have to look back on are days of unproductive thought. Activity helps to break up that self-reinforcing pattern. It gives our days distinctive texture and stimulates our thinking in other areas. Again, a word of caution. When we're starting to re-engage with activities after long periods of rumination, it's easy to fall into self-defeating internal dialogues. We might think to ourselves, this used to be more fun. Why am I not enjoying this as much as I used to? Instead of making negative comparisons with the past, just focus on what the activity is giving you right now. Which brings me, finally, to mindfulness, the state of focus on the present moment. Mindfulness is about becoming aware of the here and now, observing our thoughts and our sensory experience in a state of detached curiosity. Instead of becoming entangled and defined by our thoughts and emotions. We watch them come and go without attachment. We view them as the fleeting experiences they are. If we find ourselves going off into the past or the future, we just notice that that's happened and bring ourselves back to the present. If we become aware of any critical inner voices telling us we're doing a bad job of this mindfulness, again, we notice it without engaging with it. Through mindfulness, we can learn to direct our attention purposefully and calmly, instead of allowing ourselves to be yanked around passively by random butterfly thoughts and feelings. Research has shown that regular mindfulness exercises can have a huge positive impact on rumination and mood disorders. Of course, there'll be times in all of our lives when we have to face painful thoughts and feelings, times of conflict and abuse, times of loss and bereavement, and allowing ourselves to feel the pain of those moments is an important part of processing them. But if we find ourselves descending into downward spirals of morbid, unproductive thought, there are measures we can take, do's and don'ts, to halt and reverse that descent and overcome rumination.
Oh não, não me digas. Zero de dois. Fui roubado. Lose yourself in the music. You've got only one time.
Remakes of video games have become more and more common over the years, and if you've watched our documentaries on Demon's Souls Remake or Command & Conquer Remastered Collection, you know that even a seemingly simple do-over can involve a lot of challenging work. But what if your goal wasn't to remake a game, but to demake it? To create a version of a modern game that looks like it came from a previous era in game design? When we stumbled upon the story of Bloodborne PSX, a demake that was attempting to make a version of Bloodborne that looked and played like a classic PlayStation 1 title, like many of you, we were fascinated. Not only because of the incredibly unique design questions that a project like this raises, but also because, try as we may, From Software is not the type of studio that allows strange crowdfunded video crews to come do documentaries on their games. So we were delighted when Lilith Walther was more than happy to meet us in Los Angeles to talk about the remarkable story of her project. From the redesign of Central Yharnam to remapping controls, how From Software AI works, and what it was like adding her own unique levels to this beloved Soulsborne classic.
I want to say in like 2016, there was a thread on NeoGAF about people making like Photoshop mockups and like fake renders of demakes. There was like a God of War 3 demake and a Uncharted 2 demake. I think it was like a BioShock one. I saw that, and Bloodborne was and is my favoriteest game ever. And I was like, okay, well that's, I would love to give that a shot. So I threw together a prototype in like 2017 in 3 weeks. Yeah, obviously I'm a game developer, right? So the logical conclusion was like, well, it should be playable, right? So I went ahead and did that with my friend Corwin Pritchard, who helped out with the textures at that time. I started the prototype in 2017 in the middle of working on my personal indie game called Arcus, and that was starting to get in the way of development, so I shelved it with the intention of restarting it after that project finished. Arcus it started out as like a mobile game. It's like a tower defense, wave defense fantasy game.
Looks cool.
Very much Zelda inspired. And that was like my first major project. That was 5 years of development. And it was mostly just because most of it was just, I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I was still learning, but I'm really happy I was able to release it. Yeah, and I learned a lot
That's
from
actually
that
really
project,
good.
and everything you see in Bloodborne PSX is a direct result of the things I learned in Arcus.
Pois.
I finished at the end of 2020, and then I took a week off, and then after that, in January 7th of 2021, I restarted development of Bloodborne PSX from the ground up, with the exception of a few models. I think the Hunter model, I think the Werewolf model got ported over, and that was basically it, but all the code is new. I went to school briefly, but I would say I'm more primarily self-taught. Just UDK, before Unreal Engine 4, there was the Unreal Development Kit, which was where I started. Actually, if you go even further back, I guess you could say my game development started with Little Big Planet, specifically Little Big Planet 2, with the circuit board system, where it's like, oh, there's like pre-made blocks of code that you put on a circuit board and connect together. And I booted up Unreal Engine, the Unreal Development Kit, and there's a visual scripting tool called Kismet, which is putting down a bunch of pre-made blocks of code connected with lines. And I was like, oh, this makes sense. So I was able to transfer my skills over pretty easily, and I just kept building them up from there.
That's pretty cool.
What did those early days of development look like? Was it a lot of, like you said, just building out systems, trying to get all this sort of stuff to work?
Yeah, a lot of kind of figuring out what Bloodborne PSX was. The initial art pass wasn't in until like a couple of months. So it was a lot of gray cubes and like blue cubes standing in for doors and ladders, and weapons. And all we had was the old werewolf from the prototype with some really terrible animations. Yeah, I was running around a very basic level with some very basic textures, like, oh, here's a tiling dirt texture, and I pixelized it and threw it in, and that was kind of Bloodborne PSX for a couple months. The biggest thing was that it wasn't just Bloodborne, the original PS4 Bloodborne, with some graphics changes. I wanted to specifically change more core underlying systems and sensibilities from the era of a PlayStation 1 game, like the clunky UI or the key system. My favoriteest thing was rolling back quality of life features. So like you have loading screens all over the place, and you can't transform your weapon mid-combat, you have to do the pause menu, all that fun stuff. That was really fun figuring out. I also liked the keys. This is a hot take, but I think the key system is better. I think we quality of life all the fun away from key systems. When you pick up a red card key in Doom, you're like, heck yeah, and you're gonna go to all the, you just giddily run to all the red key doors, and like in Zelda, you pick up a key and you're like, awesome, and like, I couldn't tell you how many times in a Souls game I opened up a door that was locked and I was like, I didn't even know where I got that key from, because it's just automatically used, right? There is some fun to clunky design that can get sanded away when you improve the quality of life of a game. So it was really fun bringing some of that old design back to kind of show people like, hey, sometimes things were better in different ways in older games. People have the assumption that every aspect of video games gets better with every generation release, and that's just not true. Things go away, and sometimes things get worse, sometimes things don't change. It was really fun bringing back a lot of old things that I think were genuinely better than what they are like now, and couch co-op is probably the biggest example of that, but there's a bunch of other small things. making something specifically with the words PSX in the title took a lot of pressure off and kind of made it like, kind of like how some people would say that making pixel art is easier than like painting, right? I would say making a PlayStation 1 game, not just the art, but even the code, was a little bit easier. Not a lot easier, but it did take the pressure off a lot. So it was based off of the original PlayStation controller with no joysticks. That removed most of the important functions, the lock-on and the camera control and movement, because you can't move with the D-pad on Bloodborne PS4. The D-pad is important shortcut stuff. That basically was the start of it. I had to move with the D-pad, which means all the D-pad stuff had to be removed, and I had to lock on with the X button. Also had to double as the interact button. Quick items and blood vials were two different buttons, square and triangle, I think, and that all got consolidated into one button. And also, the camera control was on L2 and R2, which meant that heavy attacks and the weapon transformation had to be removed because L1 became gun and R1 became just your attack button, which did light attacks, heavy attacks, and charge attacks. There was now 3 functions on a single button. That is the core system of how Bloodborne PSX worked, and everything kind of revolved around that. It took a lot of time figuring out, but once I started doing the implementation, it kind of started falling into place, which I feel like is true for a lot of game projects, you know, impossibly huge code bases that you can't keep all in your head at once. It will kind of start going in a direction, almost kind of by itself, and you're more just trying to guide it the right way, if that makes sense. I can see the direction it was going, and everything started to come together. The first level I made that got into the final game, the final release, was the courtyard outside of the clinic. That was where a lot of my testing was. And actually, fun fact, the skybox texture was a render from a screenshot from Bloodborne PS4 from the clinic courtyard. And the original idea was, I'd have a different like skybox depending on the area, but like skybox textures are huge, specifically for a PS1 game. So I just used that for the rest of the game. And I eventually photoshopped a clock tower face on one of the buildings. And that just became the clock, the big green clock tower face. That's not actually the clock tower. I don't even know what building that is. That's just a random building. Outside of the change in the controls, like the button layouts, that was mostly a one-to-one attempt at a recreation. I mean, I just recorded playthroughs of weapons and enemies and got the frame counts down and recreated them all in Blender with my PSXified characters that were made from scratch. As well as like damage calculation and stat progression, all that stuff was really fun figuring out, kind of like deconstructing the game. There was a very invaluable video on YouTube where someone like hacked like 1 billion echoes and like leveled everything up in one go to 99. And I just watched it, and you can see how the stats grow, and I was able to like recreate the growth curves and stuff. I had them all mapped out at one point, so it was really fun to recreate. The first pass was an attempt at a perfect recreation, and then after all that was done, I did like a normal balancing pass without any outside influence. I just balanced it as I would balance a normal video game. That's kind of where it started to get its own identity, because it's not, like I said, it's not a perfect recreation. It was primarily the wikis. There's a couple of Bloodborne wikis, and they're not all entirely accurate. Like some of the wikis have conflicting information on the same like topic, but it was primarily the wikis, specifically for how damage calculation was calculated. Grabbing that formula was really important. And I think, that was recreated one-to-one. I actually just remembered the dodging animations are one of the original animations from the prototype from 2017 that I grabbed as well. And the like running strafe, because you have to animate 8 run cycles for each strafe. And my Achilles heel when it comes to animation is run cycles. I'm really bad at them, so I recreated the run forward, and then I just used the old ones for the rest. Enemy AI is, in terms of the broad spectrum of game development, that's probably the thing I'm the worst at, and it's really a nice little coincidence that Bloodborne AI is impossibly simplistic. All of the mind games you get from fighting a Souls enemy, a Soulsborne enemy, is the animation, which is one of my strong suits. So that really kind of fell into place. When it comes to the core raw AI of the Souls enemy, they kind of just run up to you and then play their animations. But, you know, they're impeccably animated animations, but they're still just selecting animation from the list, depending on your location and direction, right? So they're like, oh, there's an enemy directly behind me, I'll play my impeccably animated attack behind me attack, right? But the AI is extremely simple. There is one little trick that I really enjoyed, is that if an enemy runs into a destructible object, they'll be forced to play an attack animation. So they'll run up and go like, oh, there's a thing in my way, and they'll keep running. And it feels like they're really smart, but that is actually a very simple little interaction. It feels like a really natural, like smart little AI interaction. It's such a good little trick. I think that's my favoriteest thing in demaking Bloodborne, really diving impossibly deep into every aspect of that game and just making a whole bunch of discoveries that I never would have noticed otherwise, and it just really deepened my appreciation. I was obviously a really big Bloodborne fan, and I did think it was the best game of all time, and I still do, but I just have more appreciation for it now. Earlier I mentioned replicating sensibilities of games made during the PS1 era, because it's not just the hardware, it's the mindset of culture, right? If you gave a modern developer a development kit for a PlayStation 1 game and told them to make an indie game with it, and it was authentically a PS1 game, it would be fundamentally different from a PS1 game. You'd throw it into the library of PS1 games, it would stand out. The biggest example of that is the like, holy shit, we're in 3D now mindset, where every game would just shove a big 3D object in your face and like rotate it around super slowly. Every game did that, and it was great. I loved it. Tomb Raider was a big inspiration, specifically like the radial wheel of the 3D objects. That was definitely Tomb Raider inspired. That stopped as we got used to 3D. It wasn't eye-popping anymore. It was great bringing that back. One of the big things was like how animation is handled in old games. They're a little more basic and rudimentary, which was really fun to try and figure out. There's also limitations with the PlayStation 1 that affected how animation worked. The infamous vertex jitter, the wobble, the melting polygons. That is dependent on the camera, like the camera thrust and the angle of the camera. If the camera and the thing that the camera is looking at are both still, you will not get any deformations of the model. So a lot of characters would stand perfectly still when they're idling. That was one thing I noticed, and would only move when they have to. So if they're just like leaning up against the wall, they would be statue still, and then like they'd rotate their head to look at something, and they would just like rotate, and then it would be perfectly still again. And at first I thought that was just some weird animation limitation, but now that I've gone through the process, I'm pretty certain it was to combat the vertex jitter. That was a really fun thing to figure out.
Oh, don't you worry. Whatever happens, you may think it all a mere bad dream.
In some instances, there were some things that I took some creative liberties with. I prioritized the Bloodborne combat feel, the Souls combat feel. Like I said, Souls games are extremely animation focused. If your animation is bad, you have a bad playing game, which is not true for every game, but for some super in-depth action RPG hybrid game, which is what the Souls games are, animation was really important. So for combat animations, I tried to emulate as best I could with a little bit less polish, but still getting the timing perfect and everything. But for like cutscene animations and stuff, it was pretty fun trying to translate that to work into a PS1 cutscene. So in terms of combat, it was mostly one-to-one, but in terms of the limitations, I really loved pulling in the draw distance with the black distance fog, right? That was really fun, and that also required a lot of changes in the level design. it is kind of an iconic Souls thing to see something 10 miles away and then, you know, a little bit or a lot later, you see it, like you're there, right? So it was really fun trying to find ways to bake landmarks into the skybox or something, like a secondary skybox, so you can place it. The biggest example is the bridge that the cleric beast is in. You know, when you're climbing the ladder, you can hear the scream, and then you look to the left, and there's the bridge. I made a 2D texture of the bridge, almost like a black silhouette, because the game fades to black, so the skybox has to kind of be black with a simple sky. So I made a silhouette of the bridge, and so you could see it when you look to the left, and it would be unloaded in other levels, so you wouldn't see it.
Was there any areas in particular that you enjoyed developing, or that, like, you know, when you stepped back from them, you were like, oh, we like nailed the feel of this?
Father Gascoigne.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the best part of the game.
Tell us more.
I would say his exhale shot into the camera, that is the most iconic part of Bloodborne. At least when I think of Bloodborne, I think of that shot. That was the thing I was most excited for, was recreating Father Gascoigne, specifically that shot. I actually made 3 mouth textures just for that shot, because his mouth is a texture, right? There's no like model mouth. So of him like opening his mouth, and they were drawn to perspective, which was inspired by Mega Man Legends. They love drawing their mouths to perspective of the camera. You know, like a fake depth with very low poly count and texture count. So I did that. That was incredible. I really enjoyed that. And all the animations as well. Father Gascoigne is like 3 bosses worth of animations. There's 3 different phases, and one of which is just a completely different character. Like, you know, like he's like Beast Gascoigne, a completely different moveset. And it was a lot of work, but I'm really happy that I was able to recreate that as authentically as you could with the PlayStation 1 remake. That was the best part of the game, in my opinion.
O Gascoigne é
It
fixe.
starts with a research pass. I just play the game a lot, record it with a capture card, and study the character, or the fight, I guess. From there, I would grab specific video clips of the animations, you know, clip them down. So this is an 11 frame, not 11, like a 20-something frame animation. I would clip it down to that exactly, and that would be my reference. When I animated the model in Blender, I wouldn't say I didn't rotoscope it, but I definitely had the video up, like imported into Blender of the animation, and I would look at it as I animated it, so I can go through the frames and make sure it was perfect.
Fogo.
It was going to end at the Cathedral Ward, and it was going to end with Vicar Amelia. But yeah, I ended up cutting it because the Cathedral Ward is even bigger than Central Yharnam, and like 90% of all the NPC interactions are in the Cathedral Ward. The Cathedral Ward is kind of like the main hub where all the levels spoke out of, so that really increased the complexity. So I decided to cut that, and I had some time left over. Making just Central Yharnam was too small in scope, so I decided to kind of turn Central Yharnam into a, for lack of a better term, a big like backtrack to get back to the start, where you would fight an original boss in a Resident Evil inspired mansion, reusing a lot of assets. I reused the Yharnam interior to make a new level, a very short one, but that was really fun. That side of things, like making new content, kind of grew the drive to do that as I worked on the project. One of the main reasons was just Bloodborne PSX as a fan project, as a remake or a demake of a game, comes with a lot of limitations creatively. That was something that I kind of struggled with for a while. I'm a very creative person. I like making all these crazy, weird things. That kind of started with that, and also the excuse of like there's a lot of parts in Central Yharnam that are very unique, but also like 1 minute long. There's a house that's really dark that you need to use your torch. It's 1 room. There is an entire sewer system that's like 3 rooms. So I decided to take those and extend them to justify creating a bunch of unique assets for them. And then with what I explained earlier, I wanted to make something, a whole new original level with the assets that I made already, and a few other things. I tend to make new content on like a needs basis, so there were some things I needed to do to justify some of the things that I created. I only had 2 keys in the game, I think, so I wanted to make some more keys, and I wanted to introduce an enemy to stalk you throughout Central Yharnam, a nemesis, basically, we call it nemesis. And so I was like, okay, a bunch of keys, we're using a house interior level, and there's a nemesis running around, like that's a Resident Evil level, so I might as well lean into that. So. I did not want you to beat Gascoigne and then it just said D-Makeover goodbye. That would be boring and disappointing, and it wasn't an ending. It was a cliffhanger that would never get continued. I wanted to properly end the game, and I wanted to end it on an emotional high note. And I could not make any new assets for new levels because I didn't have time. What I landed on was you did Central Yharnam again, but backwards, and everything was harder. One of 2 of my biggest additions was adding in an invincible enemy that would chase you throughout Central Yharnam, and that would be what made the backtracking interesting. The biggest thing was that this thing could chase you through loading screens, which was never a thing in the rest of Bloodborne PSX. It's a unique function to this one enemy. That was the biggest thing. I felt like that was a really good layer to add on top of the original Soulsborne loop of you go through a level, you unlock the shortcuts, you come back later at some point with the shortcuts unlocked. That was something that never happened in Bloodborne PSX, so you to stop the Gascoigne, so I wanted to go through it again to make use of the unlocked shortcuts. And having an invincible enemy hanging out meant that you had to really plan your route through this level that you just went through this maze that you just went through, and unlocked a bunch of shortcuts for. I felt like that really challenged the player's internal map of the area, and it just felt like a really good way of expanding, the Souls formula. Originally, the Winter Lantern I took from the late game of Bloodborne. Quick aside, the Winter Lantern enemy is one of the best enemy designs ever, and they used Bloodborne PS4 uses it like 3 times, and I was like, this enemy deserves better. So what better use for turning him into a nemesis? That was really fun, and I made a basement level, an extended basement level, which went into the weird experiments that you find in the Mensis level. You find like dog crows and stuff, and that's where the Winter Lanterns are. So I made a very brief little lore explanation for these experiments are being made in Yharnam or whatever, because there's a bunch of dogs in cages. You can kind of get the implication. But I'm getting off topic. Anyways.
It's all good though, so it doesn't matter.
That was the first part, was the nemesis going around and chasing you throughout Central Yharnam as you went back to the start to Gilbert's estate. That was my original idea for the ending. Fast track the Gilbert side quest where he gets sicker and sicker and turns into a beast and you have to kill him and it's sad. I felt like that wasn't good enough to end the game on, so I kind of fast tracked that and then turned Gilbert's beast form from a random enemy into a unique boss. You had to enter his house, which was never enterable in the PS4 version. I needed to add a couple more keys to justify the key system I built. And I can only reuse existing rolled assets like the Yharnam interior, which didn't get a lot of use. So I was like, okay, a big house and a bunch of keys and a nemesis, that's a Resident Evil level, might as well lean into that. This game is pretty survival horror-y enough. So the final boss, secret final boss, which was Gilbert turned into a beast. That was a very big moment for me. It was kind of, I guess you would say, the end goal for this demake, which was take everything I learned, every single thing, all the PS1 stuff, all the Bloodborne stuff, and make something new, make a new boss. That was the end point for everything I learned. I made that at the very end. It was made in 2 weeks, the actual encounter and the level that he was in. Very intense 2 weeks, but coming up with a whole new moveset, and there were a lot of limitations I had to work around. The design of Beast Gilbert is a combination of Father Gascoigne's Beast Rig, his like proportions and his like animation set, which I did eventually change.
Mercenary.
And his 3D
Merchants,
model is a werewolf
Explorer.
and the starter garb smashed together with the proportions changed to fit
Thanks
Beast
to the
Gascoigne's
perfect
rig.
study.
And then I did a
Perfect.
final
What am I-
art pass.
what am I
to make it
talking about?
cohesive. That
That's
sped it up considerably because I had a very short window to make this boss fight. And I would say the vast majority of it was the animation set. We had 2 bosses beforehand. We had a giant big cleric beast, and then we had the like,
Bombas.
smaller but still
Olha,
pretty
mas de Guitolina
slow and
Andriolete.
heavy-hitting Father Gascoigne. So I wanted to make a normal-sized, fast boss. That was how I landed at this type of thing, and I just took that and went with it. The boss fight starts with Gilbert strapped to an operating table, and you just hit him while he's on the operating table, and he breaks out. That was in my head for like 6 months while I was making the rest of Bloodborne PSX. That was really how I wanted to like push it, end the game on an emotional high note, like I mentioned before, and really get players, to really feel for one of these bosses. It's a pretty standard like final boss Souls game final boss encounter. It's like, it's someone I know, or it's personal, or it's sad, or you get the sad piano or whatever. It's not a Souls game until you fight some old guy while sad piano plays, right? So yeah, that was where we landed. And once again, Evelyn Lard did an incredible job on that boss music, which was a new composition. The first thing I animated when I created that rig and that character, because you kind of have to figure out characters, or at least how I figure out characters is I do some test animations with them. And the first thing I animated, which made it into the final moveset, was the grab. And it's kind of a gimmick, I guess. He doesn't hurt you. He grabs you and throws you up into the air, and then he drops you and like clutches his head and falls over. And it's kind of like, Gilbert's still in there, and you still have to fight him because he's trying to kill you, and that's like the objective. And it's like sad and all that fun stuff. And it was really fun building that up throughout the Resident Evil mansion that I made, which is Gilbert's estate. There's some very classic Resident Evil style like lore pages that you can stumble into and read about. And the first one you read is basically him asking you to kill him because he's turned into a beast. It's very like tropey, pretty like standard type of story, but it was really fun.
Muito boas
writing
noites,
it
meu. Estou aqui a
and
checar,
implementing it in a way that felt
estou aqui a
very
checar também
Soulsy.
o no
The
clip
type of game I
sobre o
make is not very
Bloodborne
traditionally Soulsy.
remake.
I
Que essa
tend to
cena
make
sempre me
more,
pareceu
like,
brutal.
fast-paced action games.
O que me faz
Or
lembrar,
that's
tu és
the type of
grande
game
fã
that I
de
would like to make,
Bloodborne, não
and
és?
what I will be making after Bloodborne Kart. But yeah, it was really fun building that fight out in a way that felt like a Souls game and operated within the box that people expect a Souls game to operate within. There was some cut content. There was a cut phase in the boss, the third phase, where he's like scared and running away from you. I think that's another example
Não sei,
of like
mas não importa, porque o remake está muito
the final
fixe.
result is better. The original plan was to be all scared, he'd be running away from you. The final phase.
Acho que é
like,
a
you'd be
pessoa que fez
killing him, it'd be
o
very,
remake.
like elaborate animated death animation.
E como ele está a
What I
descrever,
eventually did was do
deu trabalho de
very
caralho. E foi mesmo
small,
e parece-me
but
que foi mesmo
very,
fun
like,
fazer.
intimate death animation where it just cuts the music. There's no ending. There's hardly any VO. Very simple VO.
Oh,
The
shit.
guy just like stands there, stares at you, and falls over. And it felt very like intimidating and a little bit creepy.
Como é que é? Como é que estamos?
Into the creepiness of Bloodborne. I really enjoyed
Também quero fazer
how
um
that
remake agora
entire
de qualquer
boss fight
coisa.
went, but specifically how it ended, and with the ending cutscene focusing on the clock tower, which was present in the entire game, and you hear it in both versions, in the PS4 and the PS1 version. It was really nice to kind of turn it into a focal point for the ending of the game, and also a focal point for the secret ending of the game if you get all the insight, which was another really fun thing to recreate that was in
Foda-se, que fixe.
Bloodborne PS4, and I made a simpler version in the PS1 version. it was really, really
Mano,
fun
quero fazer um
making
projeto assim
a
manhoso.
whole new level with a new boss.
Tenho mesmo
at the end,
inveja. Fogo.
within the limitations that I had, within the time limitations and the asset creation limitations that I had. And I'm really happy that the entire Bloodborne PSX team really came together and made a really memorable ending for this level remake that we made.
Que bicho.
I was actually pretty proud of myself for not crunching. I mean, I was like stressed out because like it was my biggest project. It hyper exploded on Twitter when I posted and YouTube when
Pois
I
foi.
posted the Claire Beast boss fight. It's like over.
Eu lembro-me, só
8 views now.
passou-se.
Holy shit. So there was a lot of pressure, but I wasn't burning myself out. I wasn't working more than 8 hours a day. It was nice to understand that I could cut out parts of the game instead of crunching, and the game would not be worse. Like I said, I was going to add the Cathedral Ward, and I cut it, and that's like half of the game. And that doesn't mean the game is half as good. I would argue that it's better because I was able to focus more on Central Yharnam as a level, as a game world, I guess, in this context. I was pretty stressed out, but I was confident in the game I made. It was good. I feel like I was confident that I made a pretty decent game, and I feel like people would enjoy it, and they really did, and that was really nice. Yeah, I really loved the reception. Specifically, watching the streams, seeing everyone react to the extra content added to the end with the Winter Lantern. I'm specifically really proud of what happens immediately after Gascoigne, where the players slowly figure out, like, oh, all the lanterns are turned off. Why are all the enemies dead? Why is just creepy singing happening? What's going on here? And the Souls veterans who've encountered Winter Lantern before would be like, when they heard it, and the newcomers would be like, why is there singing? And they turn a corner and and grab them, and they die. It was great. That was like my favorite of the new content. I think that was exactly how I imagined it in my head, like building the intrigue. And then you see the Winter Lantern.
Não, uma cena de NoClip.
Walks down the stairs in the green light.
NoClip é uma cena muito fixe que faz documentários de development de jogos.
That was really fun. I was really proud of that.
Caso NoClip é top tier mesmo.
Being out there so much and having people interacting with you around this project.
It's honestly kind of fun.
É o que eu digo, eu
There's
tenho
a lot of
inveja.
hate
Também quero fazer um
online.
projeto fixe. Tenho que ter uma ideia.
But I guess you could say I'm pretty good at just letting that roll off of me, which sucks that I have to have a skill to do that. But it does mean that I can kind of just let that stuff roll off of me. And what's left is just all the kind people leaving really nice comments and telling me how much they enjoyed watching the development. Because for people who don't know, I posted development threads every day on Twitter, every day except for Sunday, and because no crunch. Yeah, and people just
No
following
crunch.
along, asking questions like, "Oh, how did you do this?" Go in detail, and
Isso é
it was
cool.
really fun because a lot of
É
people
sério,
follow
pessoal
me
podia
who aren't
mesmo
game
fazer.
developers, and it was, they're still capable of following along. One of the biggest things I dislike about game development is how opaque it is and how secretive it is, because it's a huge industry with big events and surprise reveals and stuff, so it all has to be very secret, super intense NDAs and blacklisting potentially. So it was really
True.
great kind of just being 100% transparent, except for the secret Winter Lantern content and the secret final boss. Yeah, that was really great. It was really nice. I am going to be releasing the code base at some point in the future, so anyone can make whatever the hell they want, because it's a free project. I'm not making money off of it. There's no point in hoarding the code base to myself just because that's how everyone else does it. Yeah, sure. Just give it out, have people make whatever they want. If someone wants to finish it, I'm not gonna stop you. I don't recommend it, but you could try. Based purely off of boss numbers, I made 9% of Bloodborne. So if you want to make the other 91%, go ahead.
That's funny.
You must be the new hunter.
The threat of a takedown was definitely something that hangs over every fan project. That always hung over me, and I was I planned for it. I was mentally preparing myself for it. If this got taken down, I gotta figure out how to deal with that, And I felt like I was in a pretty good place. If it got taken down, it wouldn't have devastated me, but it didn't, miraculously. there were some people who contacted me like, oh, we would love to put Bloodborne PSX in our little indie show or whatever. I'm like, I can't. I don't want to risk it, you know? Like,
Pois.
I always felt like if Bloodborne PSX, even if it was acknowledged as a free fan game, if it was put up next to like products, it would be considered like a step too far that might encourage it. So like
Makes sense.
yeah, there was a few things I decided against. There were a few decisions I made about, like, I guess you would say marketing Bloodborne PSX that I decided not to do, specifically due to its fan game nature. Yeah, but I'm very happy that I was able to release it. For one, I learned a heck of a lot. I have never learned as much about game
Man.
development in the 13-month period
That's it.
than when I was making Bloodborne PSX.
Vou fazer
That
um
will
Souls
directly
demo.
influence my games in the future, just like how Arcus directly influenced the creation of Bloodborne PSX. I didn't make any money off of it. I mean, you know, I have a donation tip jar. I mean, I made a little bit off of that.
Daqui a 2
but
anos.
that was fine. It was made part-time. I have a job at an indie studio called Heartstrings. They're making a turn-based RPG called Witch. I'm building the code base for that. They're in development at the same time. So you might just, if you are familiar with Bloodborne PSX, you might see some similarities in the code base because, you know, there are things I learned making Witch that I put into Bloodborne PSX, and there are things I learned in Bloodborne PSX that I put back into Witch. It was very cyclical, very fascinating. One of the big ones was inventory. As a turn-based RPG, you pick up a lot of items with item descriptions, and you know the same for a Souls game. So a lot of those things were very, very similarly designed.
Do you have another personal project, or are you happy to...
Faz o Project L antes do
actually,
Project
now
L
that I
sair.
think of it, it's the next one. Let's just talk about Bloodborne.
Eu não quereria fazer um fighting game
I'm guessing that's the next thing.
logo. Porque acho que um fighting game seria muito insane de fazer. Filme demasiado insane. Sinto que era preciso. Sim, precisava de alguma experiência noutras coisas quaisquer primeiro.
Kart has been a meme for a very long time. I don't know if you know the origin.
Return
of
to
it,
your
but it was
ship?
A fake leak that someone made to demonstrate how easy
I don't know
it
where's
is
my
to fake
ship.
a leak. Because Bloodborne 2 gets thrown in the rumor mill like every 5 weeks, it seems like. If I remember correctly, if I remember this lore correctly, that was how it was created. There was 2 fake screenshots. One was a carriage ride from Assassin's Creed Syndicate with some like Bloodborne UI thrown on top of it. And for April Fools, in the middle of Bloodborne development, I made a joke post, and me and Evelyn made a quick little playable, kind of playable. Imagine like a Smoke and Mirrors E3 demo that's like half playable, but like not really. So we made a Bloodborne
Eu lembro-me de
Kart
Bloodborne
level,
Kart.
and that
Nunca foi um
got
jogo.
the most views out of anything Bloodborne.
Pois, porque o
PSX
pessoal
has ever made.
todo queria que
Outside
esta
of that
merda
Kart
fosse
Beast Boss Fight
real.
video. And I was like, oh, like that's people actually want that.
Yeah.
And so I
You'll
promised
learn
I would
this.
release that prototype. I would do that. I guess you call it like a game jam game, or if you made it in a couple days. A vertical slice. Yeah, I would polish it up and release that. It kind of grew from there. I looked at the code. It was very bad and janky and hastily put together. I was like, I'll improve this, and just one thing led to another. I'll make a new cart. I'm making enemies, and making tracks, and then Evelyn started making incredible Bloodborne kart music. The Thumerian Cup, that was the name of the track. And we have, I got the Odin Underpass. And,
Já sabes que o Baldo vai
Central
jogar.
Yharnam Roadway. And it's just
Não,
so
mas
fun.
imagina,
It just
fighting
makes
game
itself-
seria
It is just so fun making Bloodborne
way
kart
too
that I just
insane.
wanted to keep going. So that's kind of, I mean, it's not going to be as big as Bloodborne PSX. It'll probably be like an hour long with a couple tracks and a couple like racers, but
Once you're done with Bloodborne Kart, then no more demake.
no more demakes. I'm already getting comments like, oh, you should demake this game and Elden Ring and all that stuff. No more demakes.
Foda-se
I'm done.
de making
I want to
Elden
get back
Ring.
into
Well, that would be a bad
making bunch
idea.
of fun original stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like you have an idea of what you want to do.
It's gonna be a cyberpunk character action game.
We look forward to
Olha.
interviewing you again in a few years then.
We'll see if it blows up.
Eu não percebo, o gajo basou ou não? Achas que vai jogar o DNF, o Project L? O DNF já saiu, não é? Olha este palhacinho. Está a dar bug? Olha, disparei e ele voltou para trás. Na cá, o boi. O gajo bem que fugiu. Se calhar. Did you not know this trade route belongs to us? Pay the penalty or suffer the consequences. Shut the fuck up, dude. Em 2D não é assim. Eu queria jogar um bruto de um Street Fighter, mas só queria gostar do... O problema é que eu não gosto do design dos bonecos. Mas acho piada o design do jogo. Parece uma cena fixe para aprender. Não sei explicar. Mas se calhar tu percebes o que eu quero dizer. Ok. Estes palhaços podem me deixar em paz ou como é que é? Motion input e escolher cada ação. É um mindset muito diferente, não é? Tipo um paradigma de interação entre tu e o oponente muito diferentes. Oi. Aquele gajo não queria, pois não. Ele era bem podre. Ai, que sono. Olha, e o Soul Calibur nunca mais jogaste? Já viste as personagens todas do Street Fighter? Não, nunca vi o jogo em depth. Porquê? Tipo um análisis a cada character e como é que ele se insere. Ok, isto é outra gag mission. Eu preciso disto. Craft lubricant. Learn recipes from a base scientist. Can I even attempt? I can attempt. I just don't have the gamma root. Where do I get the gamma root? Is it on the catalog? Gamma root. Gamma weed. Gamma root. A strange substance that seems to slowly shift the air around it. It is found in the roots of the gamma weed plant. Gamma weed requires higher background radiation to thrive in the wild, It can be farmed in all environments with the aid of a hydroponics tray. Locate substance. Okay, maybe I can locate some. Encontrar um boneco que gosto é meio caminho andado para querer jogar o jogo. Eu de certeza que eu ia provavelmente jogar um shot ou qualquer, porque eu não quero. Porque eu sei que quero. Só queria jogar no o boneco mais instintivo possível. O basic. Mas lá está, Street Fighter não é tanto assim o aspecto que eu queria num jogo. No entanto, as functions, lembras-te do meme das functions? As functions até eram cool, parece-me. Pelo menos quando eu vejo gameplay. Foda-se, vou ter que mudar de... Vou ter que mudar de sistema? Tenho uma base aqui, se quer. Ao menos posso... Olha, eu por acaso sempre que existe... Eu não sei se calhar... Eu sempre que existe num jogo de survival, que é... Se eu preciso de um item, gostava de poder arranjar maneira de ter uma cena para o detectar. Ao mesmo tempo, acho que um verdadeiro fã de survival games ia dar tipo... Foda-se. Se podes detectar um item, então o jogo deixa de ter interesse. Eu me consigo imaginá-los a dizer isso, não é? Este tem Gamma Root, ok. Mas... Tem aqui uma Space Station. Onde é que está? Ah, está ali. Tudo bem. Eu já não estou a ver vídeos. Já não estou a ver vídeos, que seca. Ui, está aqui um vídeo de NoClip para o Demon's Souls, remaking a PlayStation Classic, 1h01. Eu ia dizer let's go, mas está tarde, tenho que ir dormir. Antes de passar 1 hora. Nunca mais joguei Soul Calibur, Rage Quits, demora também contra a match, sempre podia jogar com o Yin. Olá Maria, tudo bem? Podia jogar com o Yin, mas sou preguiçoso, outra coisa, tenho jogado outras coisas. O que é que tens jogado? Quando jogas é King of Fighters. O jogo 7 quando é para dar snipe ao gajo que deu quichares ao rapaz. Então não estás numa fase de fighting games. Opá, é normal, acontece. The best games from GMTK. Ok, isto são coisas que me interessam a mim. Tipo,
GMTK
making
Game Jam
games.
2022 was massive.
Yeah.
More than 22,000 people signed up to the jam.
Isto é uma game jam.
48
Vocês sabem que é uma game
hours,
jam?
and together more than 6,000 games. That makes it, once again, our biggest jam yet. But it also had, perhaps, the most challenging theme to date. Participants had to design their game around the phrase, roll of the dice. And so our brave designers had to come up with games about randomness,
Que engraçado.
probability, and rolling numbered polygons. But I should never doubt these devs. These games are clever and creative, inventive and imaginative, fun and
Yay,
fiercely
upgrade.
unique. After players spent a week rating games, I tried out the top 100 rated games, and then chose my 20 favourites. So, without further ado, and in no particular order, these are the best games
Stream
of
de
the
língua Elisa.
GMTK Game Jam for
Como assim chegar a casa? Não estás em
2022.
casa?
One of the main challenges of this jam was wrangling with randomness.
Foste de férias
If the
assim?
outcome of the game is completely driven by the roll of the dice, that can rob the player of agency and reduces the importance of strategy. So, a popular solution
Ela acaba
was to
o
let
modo.
players design their own
What?
dice.
De quê?
You're still at the mercy of
Copper gamma
RNG,
root, okay.
but hey, you're the one who chose the numbers. This is my favorite example of the idea. Rolling for royalty.
Ui, quero ver.
The game is a series of simple turn-based battles fought with dice rolls. And in between each bout, your dice are unfolded, and you can swap out the faces.
Canal do
Do you
Brawl,
want
Brawl,
lots of
Brawl Pro é
attacks,
um
shields,
Tekken player,
perhaps
não
a
é?
spell, a modifier, or money that can be spent on even more faces? Then the game adds a further tactical layer. After each roll, you can choose to re-roll some of your dice. Now, we're adding a sense of risk and reward. Is it better to just
fazes
keep
bem.
that weak attack, or will you risk rolling it again for something better? I had a good time with this game and enjoyed the charming, untextured 3D art. I could definitely see the idea expanded further into a full role-playing game. There's always some good, neon-lit, high-tempo, score-chasing arcade thrills in the GMTK Game Jam. This year, the best one was Die Pound.
What? E eles
Play
deixam de
as
fazer
a
isso?
die and can click the mouse to ground pound nearby enemies. The dicey twist is that when you land,
Looking
you
player,
get a new
yeah.
number, which dictates how far away you'll land when you do the next jump. So you could be left with a tiny 1-pip hop or a massive
eu quero ver isto.
6-pip leap that sends you over to the other side of the screen. I think it might be fun to have a combo system that only ticks up if you kill an enemy with your leap. That way you can't just get rid of your rubbish 1-pip jumps in favour of something better, but are forced to get up close and personal with baddies. But that's just me backseat designing. What's here is fast, fun, and addictive. Give it a shot. Perhaps the most common theme in the jam was puzzle games where you roll a dice on a grid, whether that's to spell letters, climb structures, or play
Oh,
rock,
no.
paper, scissors. There are some really clever ones that had me thinking, but my favourite of the bunch was Roll of the Dice. In this elegant isometric
Isso seja
game,
player matches
your
então não
die
há
acts
problema.
like a
Ah,
stamp,
ok.
leaving an imprint of its bottommost
Então
face
andam a jogar com
whenever you
a-
roll on these white
com o caso
paper
e
tiles.
com a-
To finish the level, you must
caso a mim.
shift and shimmy around so
O
you can
Yachi
paint
também
the
tem
tiles
a
to
sonda
match
de
this
forma,
map
o
in the
caralho.
bottom left corner.
E o
The
Akuma
puzzles
também,
are
não é?
well made, often just teeny tiny grids that are way harder than they initially
Não
seem.
me lembro se o Akuma
You'll have
tem
to
uma
think
coisa
carefully
especial.
about how to
Acho que
spin
tem.
your die without spoiling the stamps you've already placed down. And the game has a simple solution to a problem faced by a lot of these games, which is you can't always see what's on the other side of the dice. Sure, opposite sides always add up to 7, but who wants to figure that out? So Roll of the Dice uses its camera to always show you 3 sides, and then with a press of the button, you can see icons for the other 3. The game's pretty simple, but I think this would be a great base to construct an enjoyable puzzle jam. Randomancer is a highly polished tower defense game where your fortifications are provided at the roll of a dice. Like Plants vs Zombies, you need to plop down towers to fend off enemies who march along lanes. But instead of choosing them from a list, you must roll a handful of dice. So whether you get a powerful cannon, a handy shield, or a bomb is down to chance. After each wave, you get to add another die to your collection. That alone would make for a fun game, but Randomancer has a spicy little twist that adds a lot of fun and charm. You see, when you lob these dice into the arena, they are big, heavy, physical objects, which means you can lob them at enemies to do damage. This adds an extra layer of strategy. You don't want to throw all of your dice immediately, after all, and a layer of knockabout physics fun. I'm just left wondering, instead of rolling the dice and then manually positioning the tower that appears, would the game be more fun if the towers just popped up wherever the dice land? It would be slightly less tactical, but when you're playing with randomness, it's often fun to just lean hard into the chaos. Another common theme in the jam was twin-stick shooters where you physically throw a big old die at your enemies. I think my favourite of the bunch was this one, Gimiko. The juice in this one is just right. It feels fab to hike this hefty cube at zombie enemies.
Ah,
And
preciso
the
de
game has a
400
nice
gamma
ebb and
roads.
flow. You've got plenty of power when you're chucking
Jesus.
the die, but then you're completely powerless as you dodge and weave through baddies in order to pick the die back up again. Of course, there's more to it than that. In between rounds, you spend your cash in a shop to add special powers to your die. Now, every time you throw it, it lands on a random number and plays the corresponding power. Maybe shooting out bullets, or launching missiles, or spawning mines, or dropping out bees.
vou Devil
You can
Wolf,
also buy
Wolf
more dice and
Hayashi,
fill
vou
them
Flick
with
Devil
powers to
Kazumi.
create an arsenal of magic blocks. I'm not sure there's
Peraí,
too
e o
much
punhal?
strategy involved. I found myself just throwing dice
By
as
Devil
often as
Lily?
possible and hoping for
Oh,
good
wait.
effects. But I still had a blast with a game that is manic, silly, and a lot of fun.
Mas então a Kumba não tem uma forma? Já não me lembro se tinha ou não.
Not Your Pawn is another
Também não
die
precisa, não é?
game, but with a completely different
O gajo é
feel.
boss character.
Once again, we throw a giant die at enemies, this time chess pieces, and every time the die
Wait,
lands,
eu tenho
it rolls
publicidade?
to a random number. This is important to keep
What?
track of because
Como é que é
each
possível ter
enemy
publicidade?
is weak to a certain type of number. Some will only take damage if the die is odd when it's thrown.
Estava a perguntar
Or
qual é que era
even,
o
or
boss que o
above
Pinhal
or below
usava.
a certain number.
E depois
Where
perguntei se
Kimiko
a
is
Kumba
mad and chaotic, Not Your Pawn is slow, strategic.
não tinha um modo também,
I
mas
like
no fundo,
both
epá, se
vibes,
pensarmos
so
bem, ele
it
já é
was
boss
impossible
character,
to
portanto.
choose just one. In terms of feedback, I'd perhaps recommend making the numbers a bit more readable. They're small and hard to pass, which artificially increases the difficulty. I wonder if there's a way to represent these rules in a way that could be understood at a glance. Here's a fun one. A twin-stick shooter where time
Ok,
stops
tem
between each move.
lubricant.
Your character, a die with arms, can roll in any direction, but the distance is dictated by the random number you
Critical
roll. When you
merchandise.
finish your roll, you'll fire
Okay,
out bullets.
I've done
as
it.
long as you have ammo, that is. You get
The
more
lubricant.
by rolling into enemies. This simple
Where
setup
do they
leads
want
to a tense
to-
game of cat and mouse, of steamrolling
Where's the
baddies
secure
and
depot?
chaining together moves. Later, you'll be able to upgrade your powers, and then the game adds enemies who don't care that time is supposed to be stood still, forcing you to stop being so analytical and start playing on instinct instead. I liked this one a lot.
What a
And
silly-
kind of
what a
like
silly little
John Wick
guy.
X,
Look at him.
It captures the quick decision-making of fast-paced combat without needing to be superhuman yourself. It's always interesting to see different ways.
O Kunga teve versão boss, mas ninguém o quer pegar.
Sometimes an RPG even borrows from other
It's too
games and
disgusting.
genres for its fights, like how Undertale turns into a bullet hell shmup, or Puzzle Quest borrows from Bejeweled. So, it was fun to play Dice of Fate. This is a game that uses PopCap's Peggle as
Okay.
inspiration for its fight scenes. On each turn, you place down pins on this
Peggle.
giant pachinko board.
Peggle
Blue ones
too.
are yours,
Quem é que se lembra do
denoting
gajo na
attacks,
E3?
fates, heal. The red ones
A dar
are
o
the same,
salto.
but for the
Peggle
battles.
too.
You then
Foi tão
drop
awkward.
dice into the board,
Foi mesmo
and
funny.
each bounce against a pin changes the
Adoro
final
eventos
actions
como a
of the
E3.
battle. There's a great
São
big
tão
dollop
maus
of randomness,
e tão
but getting
bons.
to design the board lets you have some control over the
São maus
outcome.
porque são pessoas
Like
que não
Peggle,
sabem
the
bem
game is
bem
pretty simple and largely devoid
o
of
que é que
skill,
querem
but
vender.
also, like Peggle, it's addictive
E bons
and
porque,
engrossing. I could definitely see this idea expanded further
são pessoas
in the
que
future.
no meio de não saberem bem o que é que querem vender, caem na piada.
There's always
caem
something
na
fun
graça.
about games where you just break stuff, just completely throw off the balance. I don't know, it's just a joy. That's why I liked Dice is the Way. It's a pretty simple card battling RPG with funky graphics and goofy audio. But
Vais
see
dormir?
those
Tá-se
numbers
bem?
in the balloon font?
Dorme bem, meu.
Like
Continua sendo boas
your health
férias.
points, your enemy's next attack, or the
300.
cost of your card? Well, you can pick one of those numbers and randomly roll a new one, perhaps swapping your
Epá,
enemy's
tu
80
vais,
health
quem devia
points
mesmo
for just
ir era
2,
eu.
or
Fogo.
making one of your cards impossibly expensive.
Not
I'm not
enough
sure
fuel.
how well this game holds up to scrutiny. I would often get a bad roll and ruin my entire game, but I'm not expecting anyone to tightly balance a game.
Já não
in
tenho
one weekend.
Hyperdrive.
Besides, I had just as much fun seeing how silly things could get. A die doesn't have to be random.
I don't want
As
to die.
always with the GMTK Game Jam, the theme is just a starting point. How you interpret it is up to you. That's what leads to
Oh, I
great
can't-
titles like
I can't
Burp
build anything?
This is a game that uses the unique patterns on a die to create interesting puzzles. So, these snowy tiles have igloos dotted about like dice pips. When you walk off the edge of the tile, the die counts down by 1, changing the layout of the igloos. You can keep going until the tile is removed entirely. This can lead to some brilliant spatial reasoning puzzles like this one that I got totally stuck on during a live stream. Sorry about that, bet that was a little infuriating. Later, the game introduces palm trees, which count up instead of down, and volcanoes, which bounce between two numbers, and then puzzles that combine them all. This is just a great game, and a wonderful example of how it's important to think outside the box when it comes to fitting the theme.
Tínhamos esquecido
Next up
completamente,
is
tinha isto.
Fire and Dice. This is a charming action puzzle game about defending your dragon from attack. Each turn, the dragon throws out a bunch of dice. The colour indicates the attack pattern, and the number determines the power. Your job is to place the dice on the grid in such a way that they'll do the maximum damage to a bunch of incoming peasants and
Logos
soldiers.
tudo.
So it's part tower defense, part number crunching puzzle game, and it looks great too.
Já me estás a
My only
mandar embora?
suggestion,
Sem falares
add a
comigo?
timer. It's too easy to
That's
spend
fair.
ages rearranging the dice back and forth, looking for the perfect solution to do maximum damage. But analysis paralysis ain't fun. I had a better time when I played loosey-goosey and took turns as quick as possible. You could probably add other types of dice too, like ones that push enemies into other lanes. So I think there's more to explore here. But nonetheless, I thought this was really clever, elegant, and is well worth a shot. One of the more creative twists on the theme was using a die as a level or world. Take, for example, Rolling World. It's a room-by-room puzzle game about pushing boxes and hitting
Então foi
switches.
o teu dia
But
foi
the rooms
agradável.
all exist on the sides of a die, so
Foi
you're
agrada-
at a door and the
foi
whole
agradável?
world twists around. This is important because
Desculpa,
depending
tô-
how you leave the room, the entire world can spin on
Ficas
its side
preocupado?
or upside down.
Não
Because
precisas de
elements
ficar
in this game,
preocupado.
like these big heavy
Tome
doors,
bem
are
conta de mim.
affected by gravity, the orientation of the world can open new
Sabes que eu sou
pathways.
100%
So it's a tricky,
independente?
brain-busting Zelda
Já pensaste
dungeon-style
nisso?
spatial reasoning puzzle that will have you really thinking about this world as a complete, contiguous space. It's a little
Alguma vez
tricky to get
pensaste
your head
nisso?
around.
Eu acho que
I
nunca
think
pensaste nisso.
Holomany does a better job of explaining itself by virtue of being in 3D and using transparent textures. But Rolling World's puzzles just eke it out for the top spot, for me. Next up is a game that comes from a team filled with previous GMTK Game Jam winners. But you can see why they're winners. They just know how to squeeze the most out of an idea in 48 hours. Introducing Dimunition. This is a frantic shooter platformer where the level is made up of falling dice. You'll need to jump between these tumbling blocks to stay above
O dia
the
foi
acid.
bonzinho, se bem com
But that's
bocado
not
de dor de
all.
cabeça
The number
tiradas
on
do
the
cu.
dice also indicates how many bullets you can shoot while stood on that block. And once you spend them all, the block will disappear. And so because your ammunition is intricately tied to your ability to stay afloat, it really makes you think hard about every move, every jump, and every bullet fired, all while frantically bouncing about and blasting away at enemies. It's just a great
Isso já não
arcade
sei,
thrill
Maria, essa
ride,
última
which
parte.
really proves the skill of these designers. Give this one a go after the video ends. In this jam, we saw a lot of games where you do dungeon crawling battles by rolling your dice into foes. Like, a lot of them. But I think, ultimately, I prefer this take on the idea. Maces and Dices is a game where, each turn, you get a bunch of different dice that relate to actions, like moving, attacking, and jumping. So you might randomly roll the ability to move down, up, down, and attack. Then you've got to use those powers to move through the dungeons and attack enemies. You need to be very thoughtful because once your dice are done, it's time for the enemy to move. Sometimes it's best to get to safety if that's all your roll will allow. So it makes for tense, tactical, and puzzle-like battles. And for an extra twist, the dice are also your health bar. Take too much damage and the dice will break, giving you fewer options in the next tussle, unless you make your way to another die and give yourself more moves. Clever stuff. Dice are supposed to be random, right? There's no way to influence the outcome? Well, there was a bunch of games in the jam that played with the idea of fudging rolls, or rigging dice. I think my favourite though was Jimmy Blitz and the Rocket Dice. In this one, you use a very subtle method to make the dice land how you want. Rockets. That's right, each die is equipped with rocket-powered speed boosters, which let you decide where the die lands and how it rolls. Also, you can meet criteria like landing a 4, or getting better than a 3. Okay, maybe not so subtle, but you'll still have to be careful not to twig the attention of the dealer. Spin too much, and you'll go from safe to sus, and then get a game over if you're detected. Later levels have
Been
you swapping
detected.
between dice or landing in super specific zones. It's all done with funny voice acting and a charming CCTV-style visual effect. Some Jam games just put a smile on my face, and this was one of them.
This parece bem cool, este jogo.
Popular theme was you do random actions, perhaps every time you roll, or every time you reload your gun. That can lead to a pretty chaotic game, but in terms of pure chaos, it's this one, Oddwood. In this game, your actions change every time you fire. Sometimes you're shooting a single bullet, or a spread of shotgun
Warp
fire,
25
or doing a
times.
dash move.
I'm a warp man.
And also, you're spinning around in circles. It's absolute mayhem, especially as the arena is tiny and the enemies come in thick and fast. But it's somehow still completely playable.
Oh.
You've got a nice powerful dodge, generous health, and regular new upgrades. That makes this ultra-polished game just super playable and ultra-compelling. I had to force myself to put it down so I could make this video. Here's a really creative puzzle game. The screen is split into two halves. On one, you've got a side-scrolling puzzler about pushing, pulling, and rolling a die around to weigh down switches and get up to higher platforms. But you better be careful because your little friend is inside the die, and gravity changes every time it rolls. You wouldn't want to send your pal into a spiky trap, would you? And so thus begins a bunch of puzzles where both characters need to collect a star to win the level, but actions in one can dramatically affect the other. It's a clever and original idea for a puzzle game, with endless ways to explore and expand on the core concept. There's always one game in the Jam that basically looks and plays like a finished game. This year, that honour goes to Dice with Carly. This is a super polished, but also ultra engaging puzzle game about placing down dice while following specific rules. Adjacent dice must be either the same colour or the same value. Things start off easy, but you can quickly get yourself tangled up in spots where you need a very specific die to fill a gap. And because you have to use all of the randomly provided dice each turn, you're sometimes forced to put yourself in a tricky position. So it's a game about thinking ahead.
I think I've
putting
done
out
enough
fires
for today.
before they get too big, and resigning yourself to be eaten by the goddess of death, Carly, who kind of looks like a Muppet. That would have been a weird Sesame Street episode. Here's a really odd one. Where They Fall is a game about being a seer. You know, someone who can apparently commune with the gods and turn their cryptic riddles into messages for kings and leaders. So at
Ask
the start
about
of the
the
game, you tip a bunch
first
of
spawn.
dice-coloured stones with special
Ask about the
runes
first
on them
one,
onto a
the
map.
Gek Empire that
Then
once
a
decimated
mysterious
galaxies
figure
and
asks
enslaved
you
the Korvax
questions.
species.
You need to divine an answer by
There you go,
looking
Steve.
at the runes, where they fall, which
Everyday
way up
hate
they lie,
Gek.
and so on.
Repeat your
A book
questions.
to your left helps you figure things out. Now, this is not easy. The book is as cryptic as the god's messages,
Obrigado,
and I
Maria,
was
também és
never
bonita.
100% sure that I was giving the right advice,
Everyday hate
and not
Gek.
just a bunch of nonsense. But perhaps that's the point. Communing with the gods isn't an exact science, and the game does a good job of capturing that mood, just squinting at coloured rocks and using that to decide if we should go to battle. Imagine how you'll feel if the soldiers don't come back alive. This is a creative take on the theme and makes for an immersive experience. I'd like to see where this might go with some more time. Finally, would it be the GMTK Game Jam if there wasn't a platformer with a unique twist? Of course not. So meet Roll the Die.
16.
In this one, you play as a square. You can run around and jump like any other platforming hero. But you can also spin in 90-degree chunks. With this, you can paint each of your four sides with coloured paint. Sticky paint, that is. Touch your blue side to a blue wall and you'll stick to it like Spider-Man, allowing you to jump off to a greater height. Eventually you'll have all sorts of different colours, and so we'll need to twist and spin to keep up with the level design. This creates a really unique game where you're simultaneously positioning yourself for a safe jump and rotating your body to match the colour. It's a rub your tummy and pat your head challenge that will have your head spinning and your fingers just completely confused. But when you get to grips with it, it's a real joy to play. Give it a go. So that's my top 20, but as always, some honourable mentions. Roll to Hit On is an RPG where you flirt with your teammates, leading to different buffs and nerfs. Diced Coffee is a manic plate-spinning shop simulator about making coffee from dice. And Design by Committee
Coffee?
is a game where pesky producers keep changing the game's design while you're playing it. There's loads more. You can play all 6,000 games over on itch.io. And you can also see the public's rankings for all of the games. Have a play through the top 100 and see if you agree or disagree with my picks. Thank you so much to everyone who took part in the jam, or just rated some games, or chatted with us on Discord, or watched my streams. Thanks to my mods on Discord and YouTube, and to everyone who made our awesome TeamFinder app. An extra huge thank you to my patrons. Remember that GMTK Game Jam has no corporate sponsors. It's all funded by viewers like you. The jam will be back in 2023, so subscribe to the channel to receive the date announcement sometime next year. Thanks.
Yay.
Bye.
Thank you, GMTK. I've spoken to the cartographer. What now? Return to space to locate the hollow terminus. Obrigado por estares aí. Death. Ele ensinou uma palavra death? Can our standing increase anymore? Anyway, uma coisa positiva foi que... Pronto, continuei. Installation. Caguei. Pila radiante. Return to space. E pronto, avancei nestas coisas. Tenho que falar com o Null. I don't know why. Crimes against other racers. The Gek are crazy. I didn't know.
Let's make the game we'd want to play. Let's make something hardcore, ultra niche with pixel art and ridiculous difficulty. Let's do the passion project and to hell with the consequences. It's with this mindset that development studio Motion Twin set out to create Dead Cells, according to Steve Philby, the game's marketing manager.
Crazy.
Motion Twin was founded in 2001 and is based in Bordeaux, France. It was born from the ashes of another French game development studio called Callisto Entertainment, which suffered greatly from the early 2000 financial crisis. Its management proved unable to rise to the difficult challenges the crisis posed, reportedly even giving out false information about the financial situation of the company. Eventually, Callisto Entertainment declared bankruptcy in 2002. A handful of employees from Callisto Entertainment joined forces and established Motion Twin. It was founded as a cooperative society, meaning all employees receive the same salary. It also means the studio doesn't have a boss or traditional hierarchy. When it comes to the company's business strategy and creative choices, all members have an equal say. This company structure allows for work-life balance and healthy labor practices. The only downside is that decision-making becomes very time-consuming. When you go to Motion Twin Paradigm, I come from a traditional working background. It just feels right. It makes sense. You're doing it every day and you're thinking, of course this is how you should organize life at work. When you start telling people about it, people are saying that this is how they want things to be. We're doing it, so they give it a try. You can tweak a
Hello.
few things in the
Hello,
way that a
Liv.
company is run, and all of a sudden you have this intense feeling of ownership and responsibility and worth in what you are doing. A lot of people are looking for that feeling today. After more than a decade, the small team had developed over 100 games, mostly free-to-play browser and mobile games such as Hammerfest, MyBrute, Mush, Die Tonight, Alpha Bounce, and Twinoid, the last being a gaming platform that houses many of Motion Twin's browser games. Dead Cell's fascinating and intricate history starts in 2012, when the developers set out to make a follow-up to Die Tonight, a multiplayer point-and-click browser game released in 2008. It features a cooperative survival system where up to 40 players have to work together to form defenses around a town. The game mimics time in the real world, giving players plenty of hours each day to look for resources and set up traps. When it shifts to the attack phase between 11 and 11:15 PM, waves of zombies attack and the players find out whether their defenses suffice to protect the town. While the whole game takes place in real time, it's important to note that players wouldn't necessarily cooperate in real time, since everyone was able to just drop in and out of the game during the defense phase. The original French version of Die Tonight was titled Hordes, and in April 2012, former Motion Twin developer Sébastien Bénard teased on Twinoid that he was brainstorming a second game that was set in the same Hordes universe, titled Horde Zero. The core idea for the sequel was to make the attack phase more exciting by fusing it with a 2D strategy tower defense minigame. During the day, players could leave their vehicle and explore a hexagonal map to gather resources for the upcoming attack at night. The tower defense minigame would start once players returned to their vehicle. After each attack, they had to decide what to do next. Stay and face a stronger attack in a location they knew, or move on and find a new place to defend while exploring the map. In January 2013, it was announced that the game design was all set, a team was formed and development had officially started. Later that month, Motion Twin already launched the beta for players via Twinoid. The plan was to make Horde Zero compatible with mobile devices this time, unlike its predecessor. It's also worth mentioning that Motion Twin decided to lean more towards a free-to-play model, since most mobile games were going free-to-play at the time. Horde Zero's website officially launched in June 2013. For the first time, fans could discover the visual identity of the game through artwork, a logo, and other visual details. However, it wouldn't be long until the direction of the game would take a drastic turn, taking us one step closer to the Dead Cells experience we know today. See, during all their beta playtests, it became clear that, while the concept looked good on paper, playing it wasn't actually that fun. The exploration and tower defense mechanics weren't necessarily bad, but the multiplayer cooperation aspect wasn't engaging enough when you were playing by yourself. Sure, the developers had fun when they were all playing at the same time in their office, but most members of the community were playing by themselves. As a result, Motion Twin decided to cut the slower parts of the game, namely the map and exploration phase, and instead make the much more engaging and fun tower defense mechanic central to the experience. Additionally, the modern day setting was swapped out for something more medieval looking. This new direction for the game was teased for the first time in August 2013 by Sébastien, who posted a mysterious message on the Twinoid forum that contained clues to all the upcoming changes. 2 months later, the project's website was updated dramatically, with previous artwork now smeared with blood, and the game's title Horde Zero covered in graffiti. The team posted more and more artwork and screenshots in the following months, showing off the new setting and updated gameplay. In April 2014, Motion Twin announced they had completed a fully playable version of the new and improved Horde Zero. Now, players were dropped in an area they needed to defend. At the end of each attack, the players were given an option to either stay and defend the same area again, or go to a new location. The more attacks you would survive as a team, the higher the score. However, in the end, only one player could claim the title of Last Man Standing, giving the game a competitive edge. Keep in mind that Horde Zero was still a drop-in, drop-out multiplayer game at this stage, meaning players weren't always playing together at the same time. Before we move on, I'd like to talk about this video's sponsor, NordVPN. Take control of your important game conferences such as Gamescom were just around the corner, but because of the nature of the multiplayer gameplay, Horde Zero wasn't the easiest game to showcase in front of a group of people. Nonetheless, the developers were determined to show off their 2D tower defense gameplay in order to gather as much feedback as possible, as well as to get noticed by attending press outlets and publishers. Therefore, they quickly removed the multiplayer and free-to-play aspects from the game and turned it into a single-player experience, making it much more appealing and easier to demonstrate at gaming events. In August 2014, the devs then took this prototype to multiple game conferences, one of them being the Big Indie Pitch, a competition where indie developers have 3 minutes to pitch their ideas to a panel of judges. They came in 3rd place, and this sparked their enthusiasm to take it to Gamescom that same month. Not only did lots of people there really like the single-player experience, giving them a confidence boost, they were also approached by many publishers who were very interested in partnering with them. It was a clear sign they were on the right track. What's more, they noticed at Gamescom that no one was able to easily pronounce the name Horde Zero, prompting them to officially change the title to Dead Cells a couple of weeks later. The current version was far removed from the originally planned sequel to Die Tonight anyway, so changing the name made sense. As you can see from the updated website that went along with the title change, Motion Twin was still determined to release Dead Cells as a multiplayer game, despite the single-player version receiving lots of praise. From September until December 2014, the team held more alpha tests with 30 players, and these trials garnered positive feedback from participants. In October, the studio even released 2 new videos to highlight the cooperative tower defense gameplay. This version of the game was built for 4 players, each controlling an ever-evolving character that took on adventures in a completely randomized house. In that house, players had to place traps and use weapons to survive waves of zombies. The goal was to outlast the other players through day and night cycles. Only the last survivor was crowned the winner. Unfortunately, they were once again faced with a major problem from the original Horde Zero prototype. The game was only fun when everyone was playing online at the same time. It was clear that, for Dead Cells to really work in its current form and become a hit, the multiplayer had to shift to 100% real-time gameplay only. This meant restructuring the whole technical backend. Even then, there were still some glaring flaws in the overall game design, including the free-to-play economy that the game was built upon. To fix all this, the small studio needed a lot of time and a lot of money. Motion Twin was running out of both. By the end of 2014, the devs made the call to put development on hold until they could obtain government funding. Failing to achieve this meant killing the project entirely. Anything else would have endangered the survival of Motion Twin. The application process for funding by the French government was long and involved stacks of paperwork. In the meantime, developer Sébastien and Thomas Vasseur started working on a web and mobile game called Monster Hotel. Fast forward to October 2015, when the studio received official confirmation that their government funding for Dead Cells was approved. Sébastien was very excited to hop back on Dead Cells, although he soon found out that wasn't happening just yet. Just as Monster Hotel was wrapping up development, Apple and Google contacted the studio to let them know they were very interested in featuring the game on their storefront, but only if several new features were added to the game. The team jumped at the opportunity, essentially halting production of their tower defense game once more, seeing that Sébastien was lead developer of both Monster Hotel and Dead Cells. It took the studio about a month to finish and release Monster Hotel. By December, it had gained a small player base, and Motion Twin deemed it somewhat of a success. The studio was even considering continuing development to add more and more content to increase profits. However, a lot had changed ever since Dead Cells was put on hold a year before, and developers Sébastien and Thomas were done making mobile games. Instead, they wanted to work on hardcore PC games. They even considered leaving Motion Twin altogether to start developing games on their own. It's at that moment the whole team started evaluating the direction of the company and came to the conclusion that competing in the increasingly complex mobile market required more investment, more than they were willing to make. It just wasn't working. It wasn't happening. It took us way too long, spending way too much money on it. We realized that we actually didn't want to do that anymore. When you've been doing it for that long, it's a very difficult decision to make. To say, okay, we're just going to throw away everything that we know how to do and make PC hardcore games, potentially for consoles as well. So, in the beginning of 2016, the team at Motion Twin decided to take the ultimate leap of faith. To change the aim of their company entirely by focusing all its attention on Dead Cells and Dead Cells only. For this to work, the game had to be something every team member was excited about. Sébastien remembers a meeting where someone asked if anyone actually likes tower defense games. No one raised their hand. It was an awkward moment according to Sébastien, but it ultimately motivated them to start developing something they were actually passionate about. Dead Cells would become something entirely different and ultra niche. The team knew the entire project would be a risk in terms of interested players. They made a series of changes following their gut feeling and taking away parts of the game they deemed unnecessary. Multiplayer became single player, free to play went out the window, and graphic artist Thomas even suggested and eventually succeeded in getting rid of the tower defense mechanic altogether. The project that started out as Horde Zero had now entered its second and final iteration. The stakes couldn't have been higher. With the company's drastic change of direction, Dead Cells needed to become a
Eu acho
success
fixe
for the studio to have a
para
chance
fazer
of
multitasking.
surviving. On top of that, they had to do it fast, as the studio only received enough
Tower
money from
Defense
the
enquanto ouves
government to fund
podcast
development for
racista
1
assim.
year. The
Bem cool.
developers figured this might be the last game they'll ever make. Dealing with different targets, different marketing tactics, and a different game, the team was under a lot of pressure to succeed in 12 months. The upside to it potentially being their last game was the freedom to make whatever they wanted. Not a single idea was off the table. Being huge fans of Castlevania, Sébastien and Thomas wanted to make their interpretation of the legendary 2D action platformer and fuse it with roguelike mechanics. The rest of the team was immediately on
Se não
board,
gostas de
and so
podcasts,
now
pronto,
development on Dead Cells the
é vida.
roguelike action game could finally start. One of the most notable features is probably its permadeath system. Its motto, kill, die, learn, repeat, immediately sets the tone and expectations. There are no checkpoints. Learning your enemy's patterns is key, or you'll die and be sent back to your cell and have to start a new run. With every run you can make different choices, take different routes, and ultimately choose how you want to play. Designing the controls in such a way that the player would not get frustrated when dying again and again, and integrating a sense of fairness was important to the team. They wanted the player to realize what they did wrong, so they could correct themselves during the next run, instead of blaming the controls for their death. Another essential mechanic of the game is the randomized dungeon resets. Level generation proved very tricky according to Sébastien, however.
Yeah.
It was
O
a
random
time of
generation
no
não é
man's
muito
sky, and
grande
everyone
no
was
jogo.
traumatized by huge levels with no actual meaning. The real problem with random generation, it's all about getting good results. It's really complicated to explain to a computer what a good result is. That is something that actually takes a lot of intuition, a lot of feeling. It is not something the computer can actually understand. So making sure that you translate these rules in some kind of algorithm, that is the difficult part. While it was difficult getting good results using procedural generation, it was essential for Motion
I'm doing
Twin
fine,
because
but
they
I'm
simply
gonna
didn't
go to
have the
bed.
time nor enough developers to
So-
do everything by hand.
Sorry, I had to turn this off because I need to go to sleep. Kissezinhos, kissesolas. Cuidado com as pilolas. Have a good night. Love you, appreciate you. Be careful. E é isso. É das melhores. Aquilo praticamente não tem random generation. Deve ser por isso que gostas tanto. Mas pronto, vá. Beijinhos.